We're going to be diving into modifications in a lot more depth, and very specifically into this video, we're going to look at the value of modifications within the adaptive asana method and how they actually really help you as a teacher to be able to more confidently lead transformational classes for your yoga students. In order to be able to facilitate an experience for our students and really hold space and support them in a way that is very personal, we need to know how to be able to adapt our teaching, make modifications, offer different ways of doing things and variations that really help to meet our students' needs. And this is why within this method, we look at modifications as not just being for those who can't, but being something that is used to personalize and customize the practice of yoga for every single person, not just for those people who we would perceive or we would see or they would label themselves as not being able to do something. When we stop reserving modifications or variations for people who, again, we would perceive or they would perceive that they can't do something, we see that they actually hold so much value for every single person, because every single person who approaches their yoga practice really can learn how to personalize and really can customize, and it is well within their rights and to optimize the benefits of their practice to be able to constantly modify their practice to make it more personal, to really be customized to suit their individual needs. Now, even those students who you can see, it's pretty obvious that they're able to do a lot of the poses and they don't necessarily need a modification, it is even more valuable for those people because quite oftentimes, as I've spoken about in previous videos, a lot of people are performing and conforming within their practice. They are trying to do everything that they can to fit into a particular way of doing something, fit the mold, and literally adhere to a specific way of doing something without actually considering what it is that they might need or what's going to be useful for them within their yoga. And their willingness to personalize and customize their practice via taking on board the approach of modifying their practice and not just trying to fit in or perform and conform, that lends itself through their perspective and for your tools as a teacher to be able to really help them embody and integrate the essence of yoga, that self-awareness, that self-connection, and really being able to tune in, listen, and actually respond to what it is that they are needing out of their practice. Now, this is a tendency that a lot of students have, particularly those ones who can fit in or try to fit themselves into this very particular way or very standard way of doing yoga. You can begin to thread these things into the way that you teach them through the way that you offer modifications or variations, through the way you encourage your students to personalize and customize and just to even acknowledge their tendencies to try to fit in, and then the importance and the value behind personalizing and customizing their practice. These are things that we're going to get more deeply into in later videos, and this relates to how you help your students to integrate and embody the essence of yoga and yoga's philosophy and its principles through these types of things. Now, maybe you've had the experience as a teacher where you have given a more standard, blanketed, modified way of doing a pose to someone and it just hasn't worked. Maybe you can see it on your student's face. Maybe you can really feel it yourself that it's just not enough. Now, generally, modifications that stay within the confines of what we would consider yoga asana to be, generally these things only meet the needs of so many of your students. And even then, they're very boxed in. So if we truly want to offer genuine modifications that are meaningful for our students, then we need to be okay with stepping outside of the parameters of what we know yoga asana to be and starting to explore some other ways of creating modifications through personalizing and customizing the practice for our students. And when you do this, you will begin to feel a lot more more confident and even a lot more fulfilled within your purpose of being able to help your students, right? That is a big component of being a teacher, is that we want to be able to guide, hold space, support, and empower our students and help them to be able to really experience a yoga class in a way that's beneficial and optimal for them. Most times, our students are under the perception, and we are under the perception as teachers, that there is a superior way to do a pose. And if we can't do this idyllic or superior way, then we pick a way to modify. We pick a modification. And oftentimes, this isn't necessarily perceived by your students or even by us as teachers as having the same value, the same benefit, and the same type of optimal outcome as doing the more superior or idyllic way. We oftentimes are looking at a modification as being inferior, less beneficial than something like this idyllic thing that we're creating the modification based off of. Now, this is a whole other mentality in itself that is really important for you to become aware of as a teacher, because again, you might have this perception, and it's very likely that your students have this perception. This is what I have found to be so incredibly common. Even if there are students that are happy to modify and they're feeling content in their modification, it still is approached with this underlying sentiment that it's still not the thing. It's still not the yoga thing. It's like, oh yeah, I modify, I know what to do, and I can do this and I can do that. But there's still, what I have found, seems to be a little bit of an inferiority complex. Like, what I can do is this, and I can modify, and I'm okay with that, but there's still this underlying sense of it not being good enough, or not providing the most optimal benefits, or it not being, again, the thing, the yoga thing to do. So if we want to help our students really deeply connect with themselves, listen to their needs, and be empowered, then it's very important that we begin to present modifications in these ways to personalize and customize a practice, not through that lens of there being an idyllic or superior way of doing something. And this also includes the idea of correct alignment. Correct alignment should be questioned. We shouldn't just take it for exactly what we're told that it is. It's important for our students to be able to have an empowering experience. And that means that they can and they should question alignment and experiment with alignment and explore what sort of alignment works for them. So rather than adhering to something like correct alignment, if we really truly want to empower our students to personalize and customize their practice to align with their needs so they're empowered, then we need to look at more exploratory alignment, or alignment that is discovered by the individual. And the more that we can explore our students to personalize and customize their practice and modify things, the more they're going to be able to define what alignment means for them, what valuable alignment means for them, what introspective alignment means for them, and how they go through the process of discovering the alignment that does hold the most benefits for them in their practice. Now, you might be thinking, but correct alignment is there to keep your students safe. Yes, I totally get that, and that is very important. However, what has happened is that we've taken that safety precaution and we have totally blown it out of proportion, to the point where we are not encouraging our students to explore themselves, and we're controlling and micromanaging what it is that they're doing, and we're not allowing them to go on that empowering journey of self-discovery. More often than not, correct alignment comes with these very extreme ideologies, as I said before, with this one way to do a pose. And if you can't get that way, then we're going to modify and you can take these lesser options. But instead, if we flip the script a little bit and we were able to help our students understand the value of personalizing and customizing their practice via modifications, then they would be able to see that it is incredibly important for them to discover the alignment, which then perpetuates the safety for them because they're doing it in a mindful, supportive way, versus just blindly adhering to a particular way of doing something without having the context or the information to be able to discern or discover what alignment actually works for them. Now, I taught for many, many years and practiced this way with correct alignment. I was like a stickler for these things. And I can tell you right now, for the incredible incredibly vast amount of bodies that I taught and the various types of practices that I did, it really just does not work out in the long run for the majority of your students. Now, there is a way within the adaptive asana method where we consider our students' safety, and I'm going to share that with you in a video later on in a lot more depth, how you can utilize some technique within this method to be able to help your students practice much more safely without having to just always align dogmatically to this one way of doing something. Now, as much as we would attempt to cater our classes to all kinds of different people, it is absolutely impossible and highly improbable that one class will give one student absolutely everything that they need. And that is why it is so important, in order to facilitate an empowering, transformative practice for your students, that you feature heaps and heaps of modification techniques and methods, which we're going to get into more detail further on in your classes, because that gives the personalization and the customization to your students so that every student can start to modify and take whatever it is that the teacher is offering or suggesting and mindfully discern, how do I want to apply this? How do I want to experiment with this? How do I want to play around with this? How do I want to discover whether whatever it is that the teacher is suggesting is going to work for me or not? Is it going to align for me or not? That is why it is so important for us to be able to know how to incorporate these ways of modifying in our classes. When you consider the structure and the purpose of your yoga class, you might really align with empowering your students so that not only are they taking on board this reflective approach when they're on the mat, but when they go off the mat into the rest of their lives, which is the majority, right? The time on the mat is the lesser time. The time off the mat is what's taking up the majority of their time. Then you really want to be able to encourage them to understand that quite often they're going about their day taking on board directions from all kinds of people around them, very often giving their power away. So if you are aligned with offering an empowering experience for your students, then that would be the very last place that you would want them to do that, on their mat. You would want them to do the opposite, right? To be able to feel empowered and to govern themselves in a way that is suitable for themselves. And this is part of the adaptive asana method. How can we help our students learn how to modify things, personalize and customize their practice so that they are empowered, so that they're not just using their yoga practice to perpetuate and add fuel to the fire of this habitual tendency to constantly be outsourcing and giving their power away to someone else or an authority figure, or trying to just fit in with the group all the time. And this is why it's so important for every single one of your students to be constantly modifying their practice, not just the ones who would appear or perceive that they can't do one specific way, but every single type of person that comes into the practice. And this is one majorly substantial way that we can help our students practice and embody the essence of yoga, that self-awareness, that self-responsibility, and that turning of the gaze inward. It is through encouraging every student to modify their practice so it becomes more personal and they go through that customizing approach, and we're going to teach them how to do that with this method. Now later on, when we get to the cueing section, I'm going to be going into a lot more detail with some things that you can say to your students that will help them to see the importance of modifying their practice and personalizing their practice, and really stepping into a place of ownership, self-responsibility, and empowerment, because most of your students are going to have this conditioned psychology that they need to fit in with the group, and again, that they need to appease you, the teacher, the authority figure, and they are not necessarily going to be prioritizing what it is that they need. And even if they do listen to what it is that they need, it's even more rare for them to act on it. They will be getting these messages, these signals, these thoughts, these sensations, these feelings, but they won't necessarily act on it, and they won't necessarily do what it is that those things are signaling to them to do. They will override those things quite often. So because this is often a conditioned psychology due to the fact that we are very heavily governed in our world, we are very heavily dictated, we don't know how to govern ourselves within our own selves or within a community. This is just not something that we generally do. So we lack a lot of self-responsibility, which means that your students are coming in with just a lack of ownership, a lack of willingness to be the captain of their own ship. And so this is why sometimes it's very hard and difficult for them to be willing to take on a modification or be willing to personalize or customize their practice. So as I've already mentioned, I'm going to go into a lot more detail in some of the cueing videos about how you can really use your verbal guidance to help your students have a perception shift on what it means for them to modify, to personalize, to customize their practice. And that will also include why sometimes using the word modification might not actually be the best option for you to go with. And I'm going to give you some suggestions as to what else you might be able to say and how that can really help your students shift their perception around modifications and become a lot more empowered in their approach.